every one of us desire a nation to be blessed and highly favored by Almighty God. How can we bring this desire in our hearts on a consistent basis? On an individual basis, Joshua 1:8 gives us the key. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall have good success. Our nation is a blessed nation because our leaders from the founding of our nation decided to make Jesus Christ the Lord of our nation. Psalms 33:12 says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he has chosen for his own inheritance." May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. Will thou teach us how to serve thee? Will thou teach us how to pray? Shall we pray? Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our Governor General, Dame Marguerite Pendley, strength and wisdom to carry out her duties as statutory head of our nation. Continue to grant Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, our Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Kevin Peter Turnquist, our Cabinet Ministers, Members of Parliament, Members of the Senate, the grace to lead our nation in the paths of righteousness, not some of the time, but all the time. Continue to grant our Honorable Speaker and his deputy wisdom beyond their years in leading our honorable members in the path of righteousness and truth and justice. How we praise you today, Lord. We bless your holy name. I ask that our people across the length and breadth of our nation devote themselves in a continuance of prayer and praise as we rise to each new day. And again, when each day is spent, let words of prayer and praise be in our hearts and on our lips. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, and his mercies endure forever. May the members of Parliament lead the way and say, oh, give thanks. May the members of Parliament lead the way and say, oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, and his mercies endure forever. I'll say it again because you may have missed it. It brings in some power. Oh, give thanks.
Oh, give thanks
unto the Lord.
Unto the Lord.
For he is good.
For he is good.
And his mercies.
And his mercies
endured forever.
Endureth forever.
Praying now the prayer Jesus taught his disciples to pray, saying, Our Father,
who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses. Forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a wonderful day.
Brent Simonette, Desmond Bannister, Renwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Day, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio de Aguilar, Michael Pintar, Darren Henfield, Ramal Ferrera, Tanisha Rule, Brenzo Rule, Alfred Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edson, Iram Lewis, Carlton Boleg, James Audrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Heinz Johnson, Mark Humes, Michael Folks, Miriam Rafi Emanuel, Reese Shipman, Reuben Rami, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Cartwright, Cornell Ferguson, Glennis Hannah Martin, Faisal Forbes, Chester Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. And thank you so much for being on time. Many of you before 10 a.m. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentations of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. Committee of the whole House. Third reading and passing of bills. Consideration of Senate amendments. Resolutions. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Do you have a copy of the resolution?
It should be in the
Should be right. I got it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to move for passage the following resolution. Whereas the fiscal strategy report of the Ministry of Finance was duly tabled in the Honorable House on the 21st of November 2018, pursuant to Section 10.2 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, now be it resolved that this House approves the said fiscal strategy report without amendment. Mr. Speaker, as I stand to speak on this resolution, I want to first greet the residents of East Grand Bahama in particular, but the island of Grand Bahama in general, and of course the entire country, and to congratulate our island on being able to achieve what we hope will be a significant development with the announcement of the new port to be built in East Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people and residents of our island, we want to thank the government and all those who were involved in the negotiation thus far in seeing this long-awaited project come to fruition. We certainly want to thank our private sector partners for having the faith and the fortitude to continue with the project despite some setbacks and some reconsiderations. Mr. Speaker, there's been talk about who would have brought this project and when it started and all of that. For the record, my understanding this project started over 15 years ago. But be that as it may, that does not matter today. What matters is that the project is now underway and that in very short order, Grand Bahamians and Bahamians alike who would wish to move to Grand Bahama will find opportunity and success in the beautiful island that we call home. And so I want to again thank the Prime Minister, thank the Cabinet and the government for its stellar effort in bringing the project this far. Thank our partners, both in the Grand Bahama Port Authority and in Carnival Cruise Lines, for having the vision and the commitment to the island of Grand Bahama to bring this project to this point. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in opening the debate on the 2018 Fiscal Strategy Report, I want to begin by reiterating the central point made by the Prime Minister when the Fiscal Strategy Report was tabled in this House. This document, which is mandated by the new Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, does indeed stand as another historic achievement in the implementation of our government's drive to fundamentally transform both public financial management and the public finances in our nation. And Mr. Speaker, this is no small achievement. The Fiscal Responsibility Act and now this Fiscal Strategy Report is historic. And I dare say that future governments of the Bahamas and future citizens of this country will mark this day as a turning point in how the budgets and how the finances of our country are determined and utilized. Later in my presentation, I will go over the contents of the report in detail, including information about our macroeconomic outlook, financial forecast, risk mitigation strategies, and other technical details. But before we get carried away with the technical analysis, I want to make sure people understand what this debate is really all about. What is the point of talking about a fiscal strategy report and why people should care? It's important to put this in context because this exercise is a new and historic event for the Parliament and for the Bahamian public. This document is all about how we plan to spend the people's taxpayers' dollars. And I can assure you, Bahamians want to know about that. In fact, every man and woman on every island wants to know and deserves to know where their tax dollars go. Everyone wants to know, and quite frankly has a right to know, how and why we make our decisions about the country's finances. As a government, we might have the power to levy taxes, but we do not have a right to spend the people's money without appropriate public scrutiny and accountability. The former administration never learned that lesson, but today we're going to show them better than we can tell them. This government promised to operate in the light of day, for better or for worse, with full transparency, and we are setting the standard for all others to follow. Today, we will formally present and debate the government's 2018 Fiscal Strategy Report, a public document that guides the creation of the annual budget. Here's the reality. It costs a lot of money to run this country. And over the past few years, successive governments have had to introduce new taxes to build sustainable revenues to meet those demands. But the former government taught us a painful and instructive lesson. It doesn't matter how much money you have. In fact, you can have $1 trillion windfall. But if you cannot manage that money, it will never be enough. If you can't manage the money, you will find yourself having more and doing less. This is the people's frustration today, Mr. Speaker. Why does the government have to cut back when it's making more money? More money now than ever before. Simply put, a country can't operate from strength when it's drowning in debt. It can't control its future when it can't pay its bills. It can't uplift its people if it can't stand on its own 2 feet. The country must stand upright and strong in its financial footing to deliver the tangible benefits and quality services that our people so rightly deserve. Even our neighbors in the region have discovered if you do not arrest the upward spiraling of the debt burden, our interest payments on debt alone will continue to take us more and take up more of our revenue dollars, leaving us unable to devote those dollars to areas that can actually stimulate growth in our economy, improving public infrastructure and government services, and providing jobs for Bahamians. It's no different from an ordinary person's working to manage their own money. When money is flowing on a regular, consistent basis, you have the financial stability that gives you the freedom to think about the future. When you can comfortably pay your bills and you are not ducking people that you owe, you have enough flexibility to take care of your needs and to invest in your wants and your dreams. But when bills are piling up and the debt collectors are calling, money come and money go. You have less freedom, less flexibility, less choice. In fact, other people start dictating the terms of your life. They remove you from the head of your own table. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians can relate to the feeling of ducking someone who you owe money to. When you know, despite your best intention, you just cannot pay. When someone is so deep in debt, or their spending habits are so out of control, not even a steady income or a pay increase can help. The money will fly out so fast, it will feel like the pay increase never even happened. Instead, you feel trapped, out of control, and filled with regret when you think about all the things you should have done and did not do. And that's where the opposition find themselves today. All the things you should not have done, but you did. In times like these, sometimes you just have to take a look at yourself in the mirror and say, check yourself. And in simple terms, our fiscal strategy is to put the government in check and balance the budget. In other words, to restore order to public finances and strength to the Bahamian people. When we came to government, the first thing we had to do was acknowledge that the country financial affairs were in shambles, that we could not live in the land of denial and flam our way to success. To deliver for the people, we had to put first things first and get the country back on its feet, standing upright and strong. That meant getting the government expenses under control. That meant putting a plan in place to balance the budget. That meant putting aside money, little by little, for those rainy days. Further, we had to put safeguards in place to limit the fiscal damage any one government could cause. In a functioning system, taxpayers should not have to work harder to make up for the mistakes of public financial mismanagement. So we're putting tremendous efforts into building systems of transparency and accountability. We're putting laws in place to limit government spending, to require regular reporting, and to ensure there is public scrutiny. By putting the government in check, we're setting ourselves up to deliver a stronger economy, more meaningful benefits and quality services to the Bahamian people now and in the future. With that said, I want to stress at the outset that this debate is not taking place in a vacuum. The rationale and the aspirations of the Fiscal Strategy Report are created in the context of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. It is that landmark piece of legislation that states what information should be in the Fiscal Strategy Report, that it should be published in November, that it should be debated by Parliament, and many other requirements. It is in the context of that landmark fiscal responsibility legislation that the government strategically committed to open, transparency, and proper and accurate fiscal planning and reporting, achieving and maintaining a balanced budget, keeping the growth expenditure in check, reducing debt burden, and facilitating consistent public scrutiny of the public finances and its ability to act as a check on the tendency for the burden of government to grow in an ad hoc way. For the benefit of this House and Bahamian citizens, I will walk you through the requirements of the law and the contents of the 2018 Fiscal Strategy Report, explaining more specifically how our fiscal strategy and its strict adherence to fiscal discipline will benefit the Bahamian people. In a nutshell, the simple benefit is this: no strategy means no results. You may have heard the saying, a man without a plan fails or plans to fail. And that is precisely what has happened and would happen if this government did not have a strategic plan for how it would remediate its fiscal woes. An established fiscal strategy and the report that documents same ensures that we have the proper foundation for economic growth and stability over the long term by setting a plan for eliminating the fiscal deficit and reducing the debt burden to a more sustainable level. When we get our fiscal affairs in order, we create room for spending to be used for capital needs, such as infrastructure, that creates jobs for individuals. And not just created jobs, but real jobs. In fact, a 3-year capital expenditure plan is currently in the works that seeks to take a hard look at capital projects that are already developed, those in the pipeline, and those not yet developed to see how best we can accommodate them in our medium-term plan, with the aim of garnering fruitful and sustainable improvements in national productivity and economic growth. Our model of good governance stands in stark contrast to the approach of the previous administration. Indeed, they incessantly talked a good game about the critical need to curtail and even eliminate the deficit and reduce the debt burden to lower, more desirable levels. However, their promise to strengthen fiscal transparency and accountability, as well as their well-laid-out plans to reduce the fiscal deficit, invariably and miserably failed to materialize. As a result, under their watch, the overall fiscal position was in persistent deficit, leading to unsustainable levels of government debt and posing serious consequences for our economic stability. Mr. Speaker, our approach to enhancing fiscal responsibility, both in legislative terms as well as in concrete terms, was first exemplified by our actions in the 2018-19 budget. The fiscal plan laid out in the 2018-19 budget communication contained the concrete measures needed to secure the elimination of the fiscal deficit by 2020-2021 and to put the debt burden on a clear downward track to more sustainable levels. And in order to secure these fiscal gains, we developed and introduced the Fiscal Responsibility Act that came into effect on October 1st of last year. The Act provides a strong, depoliticized institutional framework for fiscal policy, so as to ensure that no future government ever again engages in flagrant, irresponsible fiscal practices that could once more threaten the future prosperity of our nation. To this end, the Act contained legally binding fiscal rules that place limits on the annual fiscal balance and the debt to GDP ratio. The Act provides for regular and explicit fiscal reporting for public and parliamentary scrutiny, and also an independent mechanism for assessment of compliance with the fiscal responsibility principles and objectives, and for the provision of advice. To that end, the Act provides for the establishment of an independent private sector fiscal responsibility council that will be responsible for assessing the government's compliance with the general principles, fiscal responsibility principles, and fiscal objectives of the Act, and advising on fiscal and budgetary matters of the government. The Fiscal Responsibility Council is to be established in July 2019, in time to review and assess the 2019-2020 budget. I fully expect it to be a very active and constructive participation in the fiscal strategy review process, beginning with the second fiscal strategy report in November of 2019. In order to enhance fiscal transparency and accountability on a timelier basis, the government has also initiated the publication of quarterly fiscal performance reports, the very first of which was released in October of last year, in respect of the first 3 months of 2018-19 fiscal year. The 6-month report was just recently released, again fulfilling our commitment to the Bahamian people. Not the other one, that's the other one that I'm talking about. That's the 6 months fiscal snapshot. Again, outlining to the Bahamian people, and there's a more detailed report. This is just a snapshot. There's a more detailed report that's also available on the Ministry of Finance's website. That again, to answer the question, where the VAT money gone? It's there, and it's published. So nobody has to ask the rhetorical question, where the VAT money gone? They can actually go to the Bahamas government website, the Ministry of Finance website, and see it for themselves, read it, digest it, and then ask, discuss and debate it, and ask their member of parliament specific, pointed questions. That's transformative governance, transparent governance. Yeah, transparent and transformative under this new minister-led administration.
That is correct.
Y'all ain't gotta be preaching there, 'cause that ain't gonna work. We produce these reports not because this is a law that compels, or there is a law that compels us to do so, Mr. Speaker. We produce these reports because it is simply right to keep Bahamian taxpayers informed of how their government is earning and spending their money. Mr. Speaker, without overstating the case, this new quarterly fiscal report is yet another historical milestone on our march towards enhanced transparency and accountable fiscal management in the Bahamas. We have committed to providing this information in formats that are accessible and understandable to all Bahamians. The enhanced communications we have adopted at the Ministry of Finance have made this possible. And Mr. Speaker, we do invite the public to give us feedback on the reports that we've produced, particularly the snapshot. which is a sort of a summary, if you will, of the country's performance for the quarter. Because we want to make sure that all Bahamians, no matter where they are, no matter where their standing is in society, that they are able to understand in the most simplest of terms what is happening with the country from a fiscal standpoint. That is our commitment to them. Because we don't want to hide behind technical jargon or behind some fanciful statistics presentation. We want every man and woman in this country to be able to talk from a position of knowledge about what is happening, what is intended, and how we're moving forward. So we invite feedback from all sectors of our community as to how they see the reports that we've produced and how we might be able to enhance them to be more useful to you at your level. Mr. Speaker, under the Act, the preparation of an annual fiscal strategy report, or FSR as I'll call it, is indeed intended to guide the preparation of the annual budget and must provide information on the long-term macroeconomic forecast, the assumptions and methodologies underpinning such a forecast, and medium-term fiscal forecasts setting out actual, estimated, and projected values for key fiscal variables for the 2 previous years, the current year, and the next 3 years. The FSR incorporates information on the fiscal policies for the medium term, including the expenditure policies and the profile of capital expenditure, the revenue policy, the policy on fiscal balance, and the debt management policy. The fiscal strategy report provides as well an assessment of the extent to which the fiscal performance of the government is consistent with the fiscal responsibility principles and the fiscal objectives in the Act. Finally, the FSR discusses quantified risk to the forecast and risk management intentions. The fiscal strategy report is to be presented to Cabinet no later than the first Tuesday of November of each year. Once approved by Cabinet, and no later than the third Wednesday of November, the Minister must submit the fiscal strategy report to Parliament and to the Fiscal Responsibility Council, which, as I indicated, will be established and will review its first report in November of this year. It must also be published at this point. And you would know that the report was prepared and published and laid in this House in November. Parliament is then to debate the fiscal strategy report and inform the Minister no later than the 31st day of January of any recommendations on the report. Mr. Speaker, we missed 1 week from our target date of the 31st of January, as you know, because last week there were some technical procedural challenges that did not allow us to debate it last week. But we are here at the first opportunity to correct that particular defect in this year's debate of the strategy report. We anticipate going forward that we'll have a smoother implementation and operation of the report and the debate. The Minister may amend the fiscal strategy report as applicable and table it in Parliament and then publish it on the government's website. And as I indicated, that has been done. The fiscal strategy report will then set the parameters for the preparation of the annual budget, as I said. In this regard, this year's fiscal strategy report highlights areas in which the analytical capabilities of the Ministry of Finance will need to be significantly strengthened in the period ahead. The Ministry of Finance is, for example, in the process of strengthening its internal analytical capabilities in macroeconomic and fiscal modeling and forecasting. This initiative together with planned enhanced collaboration with key agencies, such as the Department of Statistics and the Central Bank of the Bahamas, will enhance the ministry's ability to more fully satisfy the reporting and forecasting requirements of the Act in respect of future fiscal strategy reports. It should also be noted that the budgetary data presented in the fiscal strategy report are prepared using a modified cash basis of accounting and guided by international public sector accounting standards. And for those, again, who wish to make mischief, this is the same standard that has always been used in the preparation of fiscal reports for the government of the Bahamas. The data is also presented using the new chart of accounts introduced on July 31st, 2018, which prepares for the eventual conversion of the accounting presentations to the IPSIS accrual basis, which is the stated goal of the government. The government is committed to moving to the accrual method of accounting and has commenced a comprehensive public financial management institutional strengthening initiative, which includes the implementation of new budgeting and accounting software and standards and the supportive systems. The 2018 FSR is divided into 4 sections in compliance with legislative requirements as follows. 1, a report on economic and fiscal performance in the most recently completed fiscal year, namely 2017-18. 2, a macroeconomic and fiscal forecast for the current and next 3 fiscal years. 3, the proposed fiscal policy for the next 3 fiscal years, including key budget priorities. And 4, an analysis of risk and mitigation strategies. There's also a discussion of debt management policy in Appendix A. Briefly, the Fiscal Strategy Report notes that in 2017-18, the economy performed in line with the forecast presented at the time of that year's budget. However, it also revealed that fiscal performance in 2017-18 was somewhat weaker than budgeted, with the GFS deficit posting a slippage to a level of $415 million relative to the forecast of $320 million. The deficit equated to an estimated 3.3% of GDP compared to the forecasted 2.6%. That, however, is a sharp decline or sharp improvement from the $661 million budgetary shortfall in 2016-2017, which represented a 5.5% of GDP. We will review these details again in the context of the mid-year budget review, and so I will not go too much into the details of that for the moment, Mr. Speaker. The macroeconomic and the fiscal forecast for the period through 2022 in the Fiscal Strategy Report largely corresponds to the position set out in the 2018-19 budget communication. The projection incorporated the various policy measures announced in the budget, including those geared to securing the attainment of the fiscal objectives in the Act. And it now serves as a so-called status quo fiscal outlook going forward for the purposes of planning for the 2019-20 budget. The macroeconomic forecast for the Bahamas has been updated to take into account the October 2018 release of the IMF's World Economic Outlook, which remained unchanged in the most recent IMF update released just a few weeks ago. Of note, the rate of real economic growth has now been shaded down only slightly in both 2018 and 2019 by 0.2% and 0.1% respectively. Real growth in 2018 is forecasted at 2.3% and in 2019 at 2.1%. This largely reflects a somewhat softer projected growth in the United States. However, forecasted inflation this year and next is now somewhat higher than previously projected. As a result, the growth of nominal GDP is now expected to be higher in both 2018 and 2019 than had been projected in the May budget. The budget fiscal projection was extended to 2021-2022 by assuming that primary recurrent expenditure grows by 2.5% that year, the same rate as in the previous fiscal years. And recurrent revenue remains around 20% of GDP attained in 2018-19. As well, the Fiscal Strategy Report asserts that it is the intention of the government as an overriding guiding principle to maintain the level of recurrent expenditure at no more than 20% of GDP through the medium-term fiscal planning horizon. In addition, the medium-term forecast incorporates a modest enhancement in capital expenditure in line with the priorities that the government attaches to strengthening and expanding public infrastructure in support of stronger economic growth. On the basis of these planning assumptions, it may be seen that a further small budget surplus amounting to 0.1% of GDP is projected for 2021-2022. This follows a deficit of 1.8% of GDP this fiscal year, 2018-19, a deficit of 0.8% in 2019-2020, and a surplus, as I said, of 0.1% in 2020-2021. As a result, the debt to GDP ratio declines steadily from its peak of 57.8% of GDP in 2017-2018 to 52.4% of GDP in 21-22. As for the section of the Fiscal Strategy Report dealing with budget priorities and the fiscal strategy for the next 3 fiscal years, it makes clear that the priorities for the 2019-20 budget will necessarily need to be framed such as to respect and reinforce the actions and positive results of the 2018-2019 budget. These priorities will also continue to be inspired by the government's 2017 manifesto and the speech from the throne, both of which delineated the full policy agenda over the course of our mandate. The key themes of that agenda are as follows: promoting investment and entrepreneurship, investing in digital government initiatives, both to galvanize citizens and private sector engagement and secure operation efficiencies, enhancing the growth of the tourism sector throughout the archipelago, investing in enhanced education and training, investing to improve the strength of the healthcare system, supporting renewable energy and securing environmental sustainability, ensuring safe and secure communities, promoting self-sufficiency of the state-owned enterprises, expansion of social services and assistance and revitalization of heritage communities, promotion of growth opportunities for the Grand Bahama economy. Mr. Speaker, I think that right there is a good opportunity and a good time for us to just congratulate ourselves. Mr. Speaker, as I just read that list of 10 or 12 initiatives that were announced in the speech from the throne. We can put a tick on just about every one of them. Remarkable achievement by any government in the history of this country. Mr. Speaker, this government is not just talking, it's doing. And Mr. Speaker, the work does not stop. It continues. There are various initiatives that are underway that will further solidify the gains and progress made, as well as those to be announced and implemented that will guarantee that the speech from the throne will not only be a dead document, but a living testament to the successes of this minister-led administration. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the 2019-20 budget will need to address the other fiscal pressures that are on the horizon, as described in the last budget. These include the need for further reform of the tax system to cover the elimination of distortions in the import tax regime, to better align the Bahamas tax system with international best practices, to achieve convergence with EU and OECD requirements, including the removal of so-called ring fencing, and to ensure that any incentives or preferential treatment is linked to significant activity in the Bahamas. The need for ongoing modernization of the major tax agencies, including customs and real property tax. The need to implement the required reductions to customs and excise duties upon accession to the World Trade Organization, likely beginning in 2020, upon the completion of negotiations and the passage of requisite legislation. The desirability of reviewing and assessing the adequacy and effectiveness of current tax concession regimes, addressing critical public infrastructure needs to support stronger economic growth and desirable advancements in productivity, and the role to be played by public-private partnerships in meeting those needs. The establishment of a disaster relief fund over the medium-term horizon to mitigate against fiscal risk posed by weather-related events. We talked about that last week. Addressing the issue of public sector pension reform, which poses a major burden on the sustainability of the public finances. The Fiscal Strategy Report reiterates the government's firm commitment to the implementation of some $100 million in duty and excise reductions in the context of the three-year fiscal strategy that were set out in the 2018-19 budget. These reductions will be designed to advance the objective of rebalancing the tax burden between the provision of goods and services and reduce the attendant distortionary impacts. They will also accommodate the reduction in import duties attendant upon accession to WTO, as I mentioned. As I mentioned also, the framing of the next budget will need to address several important policy and fiscal pressures, central of which is the need to further implement the key priorities in the government's socio-economic growth agenda. In that context, it will be noted that the medium-term fiscal outlook sets out in the Fiscal Strategy Report does provide the government with some much-needed fiscal room to maneuver relative to the legally mandated fiscal objectives in the Act. And indeed, the law stipulates that annual deficits shall not exceed 0.5% of GDP as of 2021 and beyond. As such, should the government so choose, it could avail itself of that fiscal headroom to finance high-priority initiatives. It also bears noting that even with annual deficits of 0.5% of GDP, should the government so choose, the debt to GDP ratio would still continue to decline steadily, though more gradually, towards the long-term goal of 50% of GDP. For planning purposes, the Fiscal Strategy Report states that the government will seek to obtain that objective by 2024-2025 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would simply reiterate the truly groundbreaking and historic nature of the 2018 Fiscal Strategy Report that we have before us today. I firmly believe that this annual document will serve to greatly enhance the transparency and accountability of this and the future governments in respect to the management of the fiscal affairs of our nation. It is important, Mr. Speaker, that persons do not seek to analyze the Fiscal Strategy Report by what it is not. It is not a document on economic policy that seeks or that speaks to or lays out the government's economic plan. This will be the temptation of some, to point out with great fanfare that there is no discussion of the specifics of an economic plan. This is not, I repeat, this is not what a Fiscal Strategy Report is about. The law that gives life to the Fiscal Strategy Report lays out very specifically what is to be in this report. It is to speak principally to the government's budgetary and fiscal plans and how these plans impact the deficit and the debt. It is on this basis that the Fiscal Strategy Report should be assessed. Indeed, the overriding objective of the Fiscal Strategy Report is to open up the budget process in order to strengthen the development of responsible fiscal policies and promote the attainment of better outcomes going forward. As the Fiscal Responsibility Act makes clear, Parliament has a vital role to play in this regard. Accordingly, I look forward to a vigorous and healthy debate on this year's Fiscal Strategy Report in the periods ahead. As for the government's fiscal strategy itself, we are going to restore order to public finances and strength to the Bahamian people. By putting the government in check, it will have to plan ahead. As we are, it will have to be transparent, as we are, and this exercise demonstrates it will have to be accountable to the people at every step along the way. That means no more runaway trains leading the country to the fiscal brink. The Bahamian people are tired of the mismanagement. They're tired of having to wait for their basic needs to be met. They are tired of having to put their dreams on hold because the government cannot get it together. We recognize this on day one and decided to look in the mirror and say, let's put the government in check. The Bahamian people deserve to know what abundance looks like, what prosperity feels like. Now imagine a government committed to delivering a surplus, which means not having just enough, but having more than enough. More than enough to invest in the basic needs of our people and their hopes and their dreams. Ultimately, that is the fiscal vision underpinning our fiscal strategy. In the future, we envision a government in surplus, a government with more than enough to freely invest in all of its people across each and every island of this country. We are not close to a surplus as yet, But the steady march forward will continue and must continue. If you eat right in the first place, you don't have to worry about going on an insufferable diet. Is that true, Minister? I said of myself, actually. If you get your annual checkups and stay on top of your health, you don't have to worry about crippling medical bills, getting sick, or debilitated. Yeah. from something that's preventable, like diabetes and all the rest of it. Can't prove it. Minister of Education. I stayed in my lane, absolutely. The lesson here is to put first things first. And our strategy is to do just that. We're going to restore order to public finances and strength to the Bahamian people. As I take my seat, Mr. Speaker, I once again want to congratulate my team at the Ministry of Finance and at the Department of Inland Revenue, the Treasury, and all of our other agencies and that we are responsible for on the fantastic and laudable achievements and improvements thus far. We've heard the reports on the improvement in the business licensing unit, and I want to thank again the hard-working people down there, because while people congratulate me and us as politicians, we all know that it's those hard-working public servants, both those permanent and pensionable and those on contract, who show up every day and do the work of the people of this country. You deserve our thanks and our gratitude, and I encourage you to continue to improve the services as we work to make sure that the people of the Bahamas get the kind of government that they truly deserve, regardless of the politics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So moved.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Is there a seconder?
Unfortunately, I won't be.
The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Freetown.
Mr. Speaker, Freetown rises in support to second the resolution to accept the fiscal strategy report. Before I deliver my comments on the fiscal strategy report, Mr. Speaker, I would like to wish all of the wonderful constituents, rather belatedly, of the great constituency of Freetown a healthy and prosperous new year. We continue to be a constituency on the move, where I, as your Member of Parliament, strive each and every day to improve the economic conditions of the residents of Freetown. For, Mr. Speaker, with economic empowerment comes an improvement in the standard of living, comes an improvement in the quality of life. And that, Mr. Speaker, remains my primary focus and the primary reason for why the incredible residents of Freetown elected me to serve in this place at this time. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that when the Free National Movement was elected as the government of the Bahamas on May the 10th, 2017, in overwhelming numbers, the people of the Bahamas were sending a clear message that they wanted better management of the nation's finances. Michael Halkitis, the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration's Minister of State for Finance, stated in the Nassau Guardian, dated the 25th of January 2017, that the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration had, during the past 2 years, received over $1 billion in VAT. He was quick to say how much of this money went to different government ministries and departments. What confused the Bahamian people, in fact, what dismayed the Bahamian people, was if you had collected all of this additional revenue, why was the government of the Bahamas still spending way more than it was taking in? And the facts are irrefutable, Mr. Speaker. In his contribution to the 2018-19 budget debate in the House of Assembly on June the 18th, 2018, the member for Kalani confirmed what we all feared. He stated that in their last 2 years in office, they, the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration, increased the government debt by a staggering $912 million, even though they had collected $1.5 billion in additional revenues, mainly from VAT. In addition to that, he stated that they had left a staggering $800 million in outstanding bills and obligations. On election day, the Bahamian people quite rightly felt that they had been served by a government, the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration, that was simply out of control, spending irresponsibly and mortgaging the birthright of future generations. The rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Moody's, issued downgrade after downgrade. In fact, 4 downgrades in 5 years, trying to tell the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration to stop spending money they didn't have and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Add into this mix allegations of corruption and fiscal mismanagement put forth not only by the usual characters on our side, but by senior members of the Progressive Liberal Party, namely former Minister of Immigration Loftus Roker, and even members of former Prime Minister Christie's very own cabinet, namely the Minister of State for Legal Affairs, Damian Gomez. And you will understand why the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration is often referred to as the worst government in the history of the Bahamas. And if you don't believe me, Mr. Speaker, Google worst government in the Bahamas and see for yourself. When I hear the leader of the opposition, the member for Cat Island, San Salvador and Rum Key, and the Davis in the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration, run on and on about how we, the Minister administration, don't know what we are doing and we are out of touch with reality, I roll my eyes in disbelief, saying to myself that this cannot be, Mr. Speaker, the same Davis who was the flag bearer, the mouthpiece, the champion, the deputy leader of the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration, who collected $1.5 billion in VAT, yet increased the national debt by 50%, from $4 billion to $6 billion, and saddled us with over $800 million in unpaid bills when they were forced from office. The member for Kalani, in the same budget address, summed it up beautifully when he stated that the increase in VAT from 7.5% to 12% is a direct consequence of the, quote, reckless, irresponsible, corrupt mismanagement of the public finances of the Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration. So, Mr. Speaker, we are here today because the good, hard-working citizens of this country cannot tolerate the foolishness of the past. We are here today because we are trying to correct and prevent the sins of the past. The government ran on and is now delivering on its promise and pledge to bring fiscal responsibility to the finances of the country. We passed and enacted into law the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, which, for most Bahamians who are not lawyers, is probably quite boring to read. But I can assure you that it is probably one of the most important pieces of legislation ever enacted by the Parliament of the Bahamas. It attempts to bring discipline and accountability and openness and transparency and focus and planning to the financial affairs of this country. No longer will a government be able to run amok with the people's money and borrow and spend recklessly, since, with the laying of the fiscal strategy report in Parliament and the presentation of this same report to the Fiscal Responsibility Council, considerable focus and oversight will now be brought to the fiscal strategy of the government. What revenues is the government expecting to raise? How much is the government expecting to spend? What is our projected deficit? What do we expect to borrow? And how did the government perform on its revenue and expense targets over the past fiscal year? These numbers will be tested and challenged and opined on by the Fiscal Responsibility Council to ensure that they are achievable and realistic, and not more of the same baloney of the past, where the Bahamian people were presented with budget after budget, which was not only never achieved, but so wrong, that the budget document, while eloquently debated for hours and hours in this House, was fast earning the reputation of not being worth the paper it was written on. Mr. Speaker, in reading the fiscal strategy report, what struck me coming right out of the gate was how easy it was to read and to digest. No need to wade through a budget presentation, which is voluminous and has appendices which are hard to find and hard to understand. But here it was, on 5 or 6 pages, the financial performance of the government, with text and charts outlining in the simplest of terms what your government did with your money. Mr. Speaker, I love the comparison on page 6 of the financial year in question to what was forecasted, what actually happened, and how far we were, and how far we were off, and what is budgeted for the upcoming year. For gross domestic product, GDP, in 2017, for example, the total value of all goods and services produced in the country, adjusted for inflation, was forecasted to grow by 1.4%. The actual GDP grew by 1.4%, so no variance. And the projected growth in 2018 was shown as 2.2%. On page 7 is a group of charts that displays, once again, in an easy to read and easy to digest format, the key macroeconomic indicators of the country, like the unemployment rate, the inflation rate, the number of tourist arrivals, and the amount of our foreign currency reserves. On page 9 is a wonderful chart of the fiscal performance of the country. You can see that the government forecasted a deficit of $320 million. We achieved a deficit of $415 million. So we were wrong by 29%, with cost overruns of $94 million. Of course, we would argue that that budget overrun was because of all those unpaid bills left behind by the Christie, Davis, Hannah Martin administration. But now the average Bahamian can easily see for themselves what we promised and what we delivered. Hopefully, this will cause future governments, even our own, to be honest with ourselves and honest with the Bahamian people and construct a budget using real numbers and not, as in the past, pie-in-the-sky projections. On page 12 and 13 shows a detailed listing of the major revenue and expense listings with the forecasted and actual numbers. Government revenues made up 16.3% of GDP, which at that time, obviously this was before the introduction of VAT, was relatively low when compared to some first world countries like the UK, where government revenues make up 33% of GDP, and the US, where government makes up 17.9% of GDP. Government expenditures made up 19.6% of GDP, emphasizing the need for the government to either cut costs or, as it did, raise VAT. If it did not, it would have to borrow at the same incredible rate as the past government. And then we see the forecast for the next 4 years, followed by a narrative of what is the strategy of the government to achieve those goals. The bit of the report that I like the most is on page 16. And I quote, "The government's agenda for growth is geared not only to promoting domestic and foreign capital formation and improving skills and human capital, but also focuses on the other contributing factors to stronger growth. The overriding philosophy that inspires the action plans being implemented is to promote private sector and entrepreneurial drivers of growth. Growth is to be underpinned primarily by Bahamian investment and creativity, especially that of Bahamian small businesses, in tandem with strategic foreign investments. To that end, the government is moving to significantly improve both the ease of doing business and the business environment, as the goal is to enhance the competitiveness of the Bahamian economy. End quote. Mr. Speaker, we differ from them, the former Christie Davis Hannah Martin administration, who tried to grow the economy by employing tons and tons and tons of people in the public sector, which was unsustainable and which almost, as the Bahamians would say, ran us up on rocks. You have to grow your private sector. You have to make opportunities for Bahamian entrepreneurs to grow and expand. You must grow your economy by expanding your private sector, not by growing your public sector. I'm sure the member for Exuma and Ragged Island, as a former president of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce, as I am, would agree with that. By all accounts, the ship is turning. Gone are the days of the constant downgrades. Gone are the days of reports by persons in the cabinet calling on its very own government to clamp down on corruption. The government, under the leadership of the member for Galani and the Prime Minister, is returning a sense of order, a sense of discipline, a sense of fiscal responsibility. Everybody knows it. Everybody is saying it. Once again, the F&M is being called upon to rescue our government finances after years of reckless mismanagement by the PLP. We are the better managers, and rest assured that we will manage the economy in the best interest of all Bahamians. The report goes on to project robust growth in tourism. And once again, the numbers reveal that our tourism sector, the number one sector of our economy, is on fire under the management of the F&M. So much so, Mr. Speaker, that the Caribbean Journal, in its December the 17th, 2018 edition, named the Bahamas as the Caribbean Destination of the Year. And I quote, "While several destinations have particularly strong growth in 2018, none has been more impressive or more broadly impactful than the Bahamas." That's because, boy, let me get that in a minute. That's because, yeah, I get to that. That's because while the destination has seen surging airlift growth, this year has been something unique for the destination: universal growth. That means growth that has been felt beyond the traditional pole of Nassau and New Providence Island. Indeed, islands across the out islands are seeing strong growth. A clear sign that the Bahamas' tourism growth is being realized across 700 islands and keys.
Come on now.
And that is very powerful. For the 11 months ended the 30th of November 2018, preliminary data reveals that the number of foreign visitors to our country increased by a whopping 425,000 persons, or 7.7%. First 11 months. What, man? More importantly, stopover visitors. That portion of our foreign visitors that spend the most, in fact, 20 times more than the cruise passenger, increased by over 205,000 persons, or a mind-blowing 17.1%. These additional visitors, Mr. Speaker, contributed over $300 million of additional spending in our economy in 2018. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to report that, as reported in the Caribbean Journal, the increases in stopover visitors is spread across the Bahamas, with Abaco being up 17.6%, Eleuthera being up by mind-blowing 28.5%, San Salvador up by 8.8%, Andros up by 8.8%.
Yes,
Berry Islands, up by 18.9%.
all me.
Grand Bahama, up by 3.2%. And Exuma, by a modest 1%. But up nonetheless. Hey, Boyson, man, it's full there. And Mr. Speaker. Yeah. Man, your numbers are too small. And Mr. Speaker, projections for January and February 2019 indicate that the number of stopover visitors to the Bahamas will continue to grow by another 15% in January and another 12% in February.
We need rooms, you know. We need more rooms. Huh?
Naturally,
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I should really pause here a minute. You and I are on a roll.
Take a drink of water.
To really stop and commend the 376 members of the Ministry of Tourism, who I think have been doing a wonderful job. Really, even though I sit at the top of this pyramid. Oh yeah, 377, yeah, but don't worry. We're working on that. I'm coming back. Don't worry, boy. I'm working on that. The sun ain't set on you yet. We just got to wait on, Galati. Even though I sit at the top of this pyramid, Mr. Speaker, the staff of the Ministry of Tourism, once you let them get on with it, they shine, and they have been truly impressive. And so the accolades that I take on their behalf is really due to them, and I pass it on to them. Now, all of this growth in tourism has contributed to the creation of 10,405 new jobs. Wow. Since, according to the labor report just released, there were 200,155 persons employed in May 2017 when we took office, and there were 210,560 persons employed in November 2018, an increase of 10,405. What is so heartening to see also is that the employment gains were being driven by the private sector and growth in the number of self-employed persons, and not by the government. Mr. Speaker, this misled administration is turning things around. Before us is a resolution to accept the fiscal strategy report. The report shows it all. It tells you how well or how poorly we performed. The report shows you our plan for the fiscal affairs of the country. You can see for yourself. We have nothing to hide. We are holding ourselves accountable to the Bahamian people. We are being open and transparent. That is what you voted for us to do, and that is what, with the adoption of this report, we are now doing. As a result, Mr. Speaker, Freetown supports the resolution to adopt the fiscal strategy report.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed. Whereas the fiscal strategy report of the Ministry of Finance was duly tabled in this Honorable House on the 21st of November 2018, pursuant to Section 10, Subsection 2 of the Financial Responsibility Act 2018, now be it resolved that this House approves the said fiscal strategy report without amendment. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. It is my honor to stand on behalf of the resilient people of Exumas and Ragged Island to contribute to the debate on the fiscal strategy report tabled in this House late last year. We point out for the record, as did the Minister, that the fiscal strategy report by law is to be debated by the 31st of January each year. The Minister of Finance asked that we delay that debate to today, which no one objected to, but I hope that the government isn't setting up itself for failure by imposing hard and fast deadlines on things that it simply cannot meet. This might be a recurring theme. Mr. Speaker, I stand with delight to speak of this report. I would note that when the government released its fiscal strategy report, the opposition responded. When the government released its first quarter snapshot report, the opposition responded. And I remind you that whilst we were not impressed, it was too early to do meaningful extrapolations. The government has since released its 6-month snapshot report. Before, I might add, the mid-year budget, which we expect to discuss in a matter of weeks. With this in mind, Mr. Speaker, we don't really see it necessary for a full-throated debate on the fiscal strategy report at this time. We fully anticipate that there will be some deep contrast to what we've seen and what we will see in the midterm budget report. The public and business community had become accustomed to the central bank reports, their quarterly reviews, which were objective and apolitical. I generally find the snapshot reports, Mr. Speaker, to contain a lot of colorful graphics and sometimes political spin, and I caution this administration to resist this temptation in fiscal reporting. We look forward to the formal mid-year budget communication when we can have a more meaningful, sensible debate on the numbers. I would note, Mr. Speaker, that despite a dismal unemployment report, and in my opinion, an even more dismal and honestly troubling 6-month snapshot report, the government has been seeking to tout the supposed economic recovery occurring in some places, particularly in Grand Bahama. And I listened as they announced the new port, and I congratulate them on reaping. They reaped very well. The former administration sowed, and this government reaped. Interestingly, I don't hear much talk of economic recovery on the ground in Grand Bahama these days. Not from anyone other than politicians. The reality on the ground speaks for itself. Too many people have been hurting now for far too long. But while this government is on the tear of announcements, I would urge them to consider Exuma, the Exuma Keys and Ragged Island. The last administration secured investment in a project at Children's Bay Key in the Exumas. The project was the brainchild of Donna Bertarelli, one of the wealthiest families in the world. The heads of agreement was signed before this administration took office, yet it now lingers lonely without much attention from this administration. This is a $200 million plus project that would provide an ultra-luxury resort on the Key. Exuma would like a little attention in this regard. We know that we don't represent a whole 5 seats like Grand Bahama, and we know the government is desperate to protect these seats in Grand Bahama, and we know that Exuma is PLP country. No matter how hard the FNM tried to turn it, but we are all Bahamians, and we are all residents of the Bahamas and Exumas. So we would urge this government to engage the developers more, use its influence, and focus more attention on this real project with real funding. We invite you to reap in Exuma as well. Notwithstanding the lack of attention to projects left in the pipeline in Exuma, we have done exceedingly well. Our economy has been driven by the private sector. And yes, that is the way to go. We continue to be a net contributor to the public treasury and a net job creator for many of our brothers and sisters from Nassau and Freeport and Andros and Long Island and others. And we are very proud of this. But we are not getting an equitable share of taxes invested in Exuma. When I spoke on the budget, I highlighted how woefully underfunded local government is. How woefully underfunded local government is. $2,000 for ongoing maintenance of 3 schools in the Keys, $3,000 allocated for maintenance of 3 airports in the Keys for the entire year. Our pothole roads are a safety hazard. Our mini hospital equipped with modern equipment, including for telemedicine, remains unmanned and underutilized. We continue to incur expenditure for air ambulance from the South and Central Bahamas, sometimes in the dead of night. Emergency flights from Inagua past this hospital en route to PMH, where the patients wait for hours. We can manage our resources better. And yes, I'm talking about my constituency, and I'm unashamedly passionate to do so. But it simply makes good sense to invest more in Exuma, Freetown. It makes more sense. Because in business, we call it focusing on investing on the revenue-generating segments. Think of the tax and the tax dollars Exuma contribute to the Treasury. With more investment, we are prepared to do more. We can do more. Working with the private sector, we will do more, and we hope that we can help this government with a strategy of economic growth. You know, Mr. Speaker, I looked closely at the government's 6-month snapshot report. And as I fared when this disastrous budget was announced, the government does not appear on track to meet its lofty budget projections with regard to revenue or deficit. One of my most alarming predictions upon reading the report is that this government will come for an increase in the rate of VAT or other taxes at the midterm budget, or come to borrow even more. That's my prediction, and I hope I'm wrong. It's my prediction, my opinion, and I hope I'm wrong.
Honorable member,
Speaker.
honorable member, the member for East Grand Bahama on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, this is an unfortunate recurrent, I'm going to call it rumor, or mischief that is being put out, and obviously as the member for Exuma and Ragged Island is voicing it, it must be from the opposite side, which is unfortunate because it has the ability to cause panic in the economy. And that's and exactly, not just locally, but internationally. And so I just want to caution the member to be circumspect. Because the fact of the matter is this government has not had any discussions about raising any VAT. We've talked about this both in, and you go to our fiscal strategy report, there's nothing in there that talks about an increase in any VAT. So I want to just say to the Bahamian people that there is no intention on the part of this government to increase the value-added tax. There is no such discussion, preliminary or otherwise.
Right, thank you, honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, East Grand Bahama seems on edge about these issues. I never said anything about a rumor. I said it was my opinion and it's my prediction, and I hope I'm wrong. I predict this I predicted this not just by examining the revenue shortfalls, inclusive of December's collections.
You're doing well.
But also the expenditure patterns and the borrowing report and an assessment on customs as a barometer consumption is down in all major categories, most major categories.
Let Peter throw you off.
The lower than expected spending in discretionary categories like capital expenditure, 29%, utilities, 30.2%, tourism-related expenditure, 23%, are all significantly below the overall expenditure trend of 42 to 45%. We must also examine vendor payables and VAT refund payables, which we hope to do at the mid-year budget communication. After we see the mid-year budget report, I believe it will be clearer. I believe it will be clearer that a balanced budget in 3 years is practically off the table without some fundamental restructuring of this administration's priorities on both the revenue and expenditure side. That's my prediction, and time will tell. While the deficit has shrunk from last year, it was planned for and expected after this administration piled what it said were unplanned expenses onto last year's deficit. And they rave about how they're beating the deficit against last year, but then they fail to tell you that partially because they increased VAT by 60%. So give some credit to the increase in VAT, courtesy of the poor Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, the takeaway from the current deficit number is that it is nearly 75% of what has been budgeted at the halfway mark of the fiscal year. The likelihood of the government staying in budget with regard to the deficit is slim to none at this point. Outside of political concerns, we have never understood this government's obsession with a balanced budget in 3 years. The imbalance was not created in 3 years. This administration's policies, in my view, are ill-advised. You got it wrong on this policy initiative, and you got it wrong on VAT.
Speak, man. Peter, listen.
Hand in hand with the deficit is the slow pace of revenue collections.
Talk to your friend Peter, please.
The Minister administration has simply been too bullish on its forecast. November and December are traditionally the months that represent the greatest boom for VAT collections as businesses ramp up inventory for the holiday season. However, Mr. Speaker, less than 40% of the projected revenue has been collected. Yes, the government gets a little bump in March, but look how far off the revenue projections are. Only 400 million in VAT collected so far. There's over 600 million more to be collected just in VAT. I do fear what this midterm budget might hold for the Bahamian people if the last budget was any indication. And I am deeply concerned about any new or increased taxes. I believe the government might be planning to cover what looks like will be a significant shortfall. I hope I'm wrong, and I don't know how much more of this the Bahamian people can take. Turning to the fiscal strategy report, Mr. Speaker, we in the opposition support the ideals of fiscal responsibility and transparency and accountability. Really, who don't? However, I am strained to see how it's fiscally responsible to borrow hundreds of millions to pay off old bills, as you say, without even negotiating payment timelines, and then raise taxes, the VAT tax, by 60% on the most vulnerable in our society.
Honorable member.
But I digress, Mr. Speaker.
The member for East Grand Bahama.
Correct.
On a point of order.
Record. He said we borrowed money without negotiating timelines for payments. I'd have him to know that most of our large payments are on a payment schedule. And if you go back to the budget outlines how we're going to make those payments. And not just in 1 year, not in 1 month, but there is a timeline. Some of them extend over 3 years. because of the magnitude of those debts that we're talking about. So yeah, exactly. And yeah, exactly, we need to refinance existing debt. You know, so I want to dispel him of the notion that we did not consider our cash management plan, and that we did not negotiate, as he would say, discounts in the one case, write-offs in the other case, payment plans in the other case. That was done. So I just wanted to make him satisfy him with respect to that.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, my friend from East Grand Bahama take the liberty to increase the amount of time that he debate on these issues. But I invite the minister to consider very carefully the predictions that I have made. And I trust that he's right and I'm wrong, because the Bahamian people can't take much more. What we in the opposition don't support, Mr. Speaker, is being dictated to by the IMF or other international bodies. What we in the opposition don't support...
Honourable member, the member for East Grand Bahama on a point of order.
That statement, I must stand with my feet on that particular statement, because that is unfortunate, and it's not even in the realm of reality. Mr. Speaker, the IMF, any of the other entities cannot and do not dictate to any government what they must or they must not do. What they do, and they've been very helpful partners in respect to providing us with technical resources and advice on a whole range of fiscal measures, a whole range of fiscal legislation, and as they do with other countries, and they make their suggestions and their recommendations. It is up to the government of the Bahamas to decide whether they want to take those suggestions or not. And the IMF doesn't even rate you, really. They do an analysis, and they make conclusions based upon their analysis. Of independent, in an independent, objective way. So there's no dictation. I wanted to make that very clear, because we enjoy the support of CARTAC, which is the Caribbean element of the technical team from the IMF, which they provide largely free of charge. They provide us with services from the FSAP and other technical assistance from Washington. And I just want to make this very clear, because this is very important. It really goes to the way that we deal with politics, our internal politics, and the effect that may have on our international relationships. I just want to make that clear.
Honourable members.
Mr. Speaker.
When the member rose on a point of order, a point of clarification, the clock was stopped. So the member for Exumas and Ragged Island is not losing any time for his debate. Chair recognizes the honourable member for the Exumas and Ragged Island.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I spoke to the issue on the IMF before I was interrupted by East Grand Bahama.
We did not interrupt you.
As we pointed out when the Fiscal Responsibility Act was being debated, the parallels between what the IMF recommended to the government and what has been implemented are perhaps just too close for comfort, Mr. Speaker. The Bahamian people elected the FNM as the administration of this economy, not the IMF. And therefore we anticipate, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, the chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't want to disrupt the member in flight, but again, I cannot let that go. Mr. Speaker, again, the CARTAC provides technical assistance to the ministry. The ministry accepts that advice, or it rejects that advice, or it seeks clarification to come to a reasoned position. Just for the record, Mr. Speaker. No, for the record. Some of the recommendations that were made were rejected. And Mr. Speaker, there are civic organizations who are involved in this whole consultation process with respect to the fiscal responsibility bill, and they would be able to testify that there were recommendations made and there were things taken out. So it is no report from any agency is taken literal verbatim. We determine what is in the best interest of the Bahamas based upon our circumstances. So I just wanted to make sure, again, that we set the record straight and we clarify. There's no Illuminati out there determining what the future of the Bahamas is. The elected government of the Bahamas represent the Bahamian people, makes policy.
Mr. Speaker,
better, man. Come on.
I have expressed a view of what's been implemented, and it is my view that it's incredibly close to what was recommended, Mr. Speaker. And maybe I'll talk a little bit later some more about this. And at the rate we're going, perhaps that will be after the lunch hour, Mr. Speaker. We also don't support these hard and fast targets that it appears won't be met or will be adhered to at the expense of other critical areas where spending is needed to grow our economy and create opportunities for struggling Bahamians and hurting families, and provide social services and uniforms for disadvantaged children. This idea of a fiscal cliff touted by this administration never made any sense to begin with. Yes, we want lower debt. Yes, we want to borrow at a better rate for worthwhile purposes. Borrowing for infrastructure and national development is necessary in developing nations. Debt management is most important. You can balance your risk over time. You can grow your economy and leverage your gains so as to offset this debt over a reasonable period of time. 3 years, in my view, appears unreasonable, and I would submit is the opposite of responsible. We've said before, this plan might very well have the unintended consequences of triggering a recession on top of the unmitigated neglect of public infrastructure. Its timeline seemed transparent in plotting out a roadmap to cause pain for a few years, but dials it back later on, almost coincidentally around the time of a general election. We want better financial pictures. We want cleaner books, but not at the expense of real flesh and blood Bahamians. Through all of the government's machinations, the trend is clear. The trend is clear. Unemployment is on the rise. Yes. And I listened to the Minister of Finance on unemployment, Minister of Labor, even the Minister of Tourism had something to say. More recently, the Prime Minister tried to turn this dire situation of unemployment into some sort of victory for the government.
Put it on free time. Put it on free time.
And by extension, the Bahamian people. I have to say, the spin could make the steadiest of person dizzy. And there's been constant spin over and over again, but the Bahamian people see it for what it is. They understand the reality on the ground, and they've been hurting for far too long. And no amount of twisted logic will make the Bahamian people see the situation any differently. There's a reality on the ground. People are hurting. The bottom line that people ask themselves with regard to the economy is far from what politicians rattle off in speeches. It is usually this basic question.
What is this?
Is this economy working for me?
Yes. Answer the question.
And despite the modest growth in the gross domestic product, enough people are not feeling it. They're not feeling that in an overall tangible way. So when they ask the question, they answer the question. Because their reality, their reality speaks to it.
Ain't nothing on the ground.
As it relates to the focus on growth,
Ain't nothing on the ground, Lord.
particularly as it forecasts that at 2.1% for 2019, GDP growth this year will be below the 2.3% growth experienced in 2018. That was achieved through nothing in particular that this administration did, but of the strong winds, the strong sneezes from the U.S. economy, and the opening of Bahama. thank God for Bahama,
Yes, talk, man. Speak on that.
which this government
man.
This government vocally opposed when it was in opposition.
Speak to Freetown on that.
GDP growth in 2020 is forecasted at 1.6%. GDP growth in 2021 is reduced at 1.5%.
Yes.
I trust you get where I'm going with this. You're running out of time. You're running out of time to make an impact for the better on the lives of the majority of Bahamians. You're running out of time to empower them in this economy. The United States economy is now on a slippery slope, burdened by concerns of potential political instability and a trade standoff with China. This will create headwinds. This time, maybe not so good headwinds for the Bahamas. A looming U.S. election next year leaves us uncertain about the trade policies of our biggest trading partner. And I sense and I hope that the government now understands this. There was this palpable air of trying to make the Bahamian people feel there was something tangible coming for them when the Prime Minister made his recent national address. But it rang hollow.
He didn't know Trump fine.
He seemed to be saying, just give us some more time.
Boy, P didn't know Trump
But
fine.
why should we?
He didn't know Trump fine.
Why should the Bahamian people give you more time? In my opinion, you've wasted so much of what you've had already. And now you say you want to focus on economic growth. And what the minister says, his strategy report doesn't detail economic growth. But it's good to hear that you're now focused on economic growth. Now the things are headed for a decline in gross domestic product growth in the coming years, based on your own projections. Your own projections.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama. On a point of order.
I don't know where the member got that from, because the GDP growth is projected to be 2.3 this year and 2.1 the year after. So I'm not sure where he gets this projection of decline in GDP growth. I don't know where that comes from.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for the Exumas on Ragged Island.
Mr. Speaker, I invite the minister to perhaps familiarize himself with the projections that he forecasted in the fiscal strategy report, where his own numbers projected that there will be a decline from 2.1 to 1.6 to 1.5. These are his numbers, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad you're finally taking my free advice on economic growth. You should have made this your focus from day one.
Yes, you're doing well, Exum. You're doing well.
We on this side said it over and over and over again.
Yes.
That economic growth and government leadership in the form of capital injections
It is there.
and incentives and business support were what we needed to build upon the rising tide.
Yes.
But you forsook all that. It all seemed so easy when Bahama opened. It all seemed so easy when the U.S. economy thrived, Freetown.
Tell Freetown don't run now.
It all seemed so easy, didn't it?
Tell Freetown don't run now.
Easy to waste time going off on frolics of your own without focusing on economic growth. You wasted all of the time here with legislation like the Commercial Enterprises Bill that has not brought any tangible results to this economy. You wasted time playing politics, calling the PLP corrupt, and in budget speeches going off on tangents, calling the entire country corrupt on the international stage instead of concentrating on lowering the unemployment rate and focusing on economic growth. You wasted time.
Yes.
Now you want to drag your gaze away from what you said was the number one, the number two, the number three, and number five problems. You said it was corruption. By the way, I trust those in government have seen the latest global corruption index by Transparency International last week. I trust you've seen it. It says that we have fallen amongst the ranks of the least corrupt countries in the world, and they suggest in their assessment of the Americas region in their language on transparencyinternational.com that is perhaps because of all of the talk from your administration on corruption. I'm fixing it. And so far, it's been just talk. I suppose if you tell the world we're corrupt long enough and loud enough, and you repeat it over and over, they'll start to believe it. And then they'll put it in their reports like it's their own information. They're repeating back. They're repeating back what you said. They'll believe you. When you should have been in here passing more incentives for economic growth and to help businesses capture the expansion in the tourist markets. Here you are blaming the PLP, talking about unpaid bills, borrowing exorbitant sums, when you should have been figuring out how to lower electricity bills so that fewer businesses would close. Here you were raising our taxes, and there's nothing funny about it. I wonder, how will you grow jobs in the private sector by increasing taxes on private sector employers and their customers? Will there be wholesale selling of our ports and some government assets to make it look like the government is driving economic growth? I tell you, the Bahamian people will have none of it. How do you get more businesses to become active and expand in the economy? Beyond the $5 million per year investment in Small Business Development Center, good initiative, good investment. When bank liquidity is still incredibly high, but bank lending appetite for business loans and credit facility is still incredibly low. How will you balance your budget through the so-called fiscal strategy? When, as pointed out on page 8 of the report, provisional data on the fiscal outturn for fiscal year 2017-2018 revealed that the performance was somewhat weaker than projections presented at the time of the 2017-2018 budget. Yes, your deficit in that case widened by almost 100 million. That's a 30% spread. And I heard Freetown said, you got it wrong. Yes, you got it wrong. A huge risk for those of you who follow betting trends. If this pattern continues, again, I am concerned. Yet we keep getting the Snapchat, the Snap reports, lots of nice, pretty pictures. Thanks. It looks nice, and it's pretty. But the Bahamian people not feeling it in the reality. On page 16, we see growth is to be underpinned by primarily by Bahamian investment and creativity, especially that of Bahamian small businesses with strategic foreign investment. Are you talking here about Oban? Or is Oban now officially nonsense, as the Prime Minister suggested in Grand Bahama yesterday? My leader calls it a Damascus moment. Pray tell what strategic foreign investment you speak of. Would that be that's helping the underpinning of the growth of Bahamian small business? Again, I talk about the projects we left in the pipeline. Again, I congratulate you on reaping. And I invite you to get some more quality projects in the pipeline. Because as it goes, one administration sows, the other one reaps. So please, get some meaningful quality projects in the pipeline to help to continue to grow our economy. Mr. Speaker, I can go on and on. The number of forensic audits that E&Y happened to get the majority of them, presumably without tender, won't help grow this economy either. The report continues in saying that the Bahamas is seeking to enhance competition and openness to trade through planned membership in the WTO. Now, Abaco, let me give the government some more free advice about WTO. Slow your roll. Slow your roll. The majority of Bahamians are extremely reticent about the WTO because they don't have enough information yet to make an informed determination. They are fearful because they don't see what's in it for us. It is therefore reckless to proceed. When so many Bahamians are uncomfortable with it, we can remain at observer status for a while longer. Another election cycle perhaps won't hurt. Yeah. Slow your roll. Educate the public. Negotiate a deal that makes sense for us. then seek a clear mandate from the Bahamian people on this issue. That or tell us specifically who is to benefit in the short term in a real world sense, and what will the carve-outs be to protect Bahamians? What will the carve-outs be to protect Bahamian businesses? If it is to modernize the government, as you say, we don't need to join WTO to do that. If it is to have greater access to world markets, I don't see what's stopping us from pursuing that now in a private sector-driven way. Also, Mr. Speaker, I note the report seemed very bullish on revenue estimates moving forward, despite shortfalls last year. 115 million more this year than last year, 100 million more the year after that, over 90 million more the year after that. But how? Well, the fiscal strategy report didn't detail anything on economic growth, and the minister said it shouldn't. So how will you see these revenue growths? And this is the crux of my concern, that your forecasts are off, and therefore we will see, in my view, some knee-jerk reactions that the Bahamian people will not like the pain that they experience from them. The only way it seems this government knows how to collect more revenue is to increase taxes. I don't see that in the report. I don't see this happening based on the fiscal snapshot so far. But I guess increasing taxes, East Grand Bahama jumped his feet and he said, we're not going to increase taxes. I guess he agrees. That's the lazy way out.
Yes.
The report says on page 18 that custom duty collection is supposed to increase by more than 20 million per year over the next 3 years. But I thought we were joining WTO according to your report. Did the WTO offer not say we would be foregoing 45 million a year in customs revenues? There's some inconsistencies. Where is this increase going to come from? I also think the revenue collection estimates, fancifully, given the fact that the gaming house operators are currently suing the government to not pay these taxes. It makes many of the revenues seem fanciful. Also, good luck with the new and enhanced revenue enhancement unit. And that extra 80 million a year that you think we can collect now, I say again, had you embraced the previous unit set up under the former administration for reasons that appear simply that it was a PLP initiative, you didn't embrace it, and you ought to have. Surely, had you embraced it, we would be further along than we are now. In closing, Mr. Speaker, as I said in November, and again earlier, this report doesn't tell us much. Though the minister seems especially proud of it. Yes, this report did not detail strategies for economic growth, and I'm delighted that the minister acknowledged it. What we know, though, is that revenue collection was down for the first quarter of the current fiscal year, down for the second quarter, and so far we have heard nothing that suggests that this trend will be reversed. Nothing. Zero. You've given me no comfort that this trend will be reversed. Not one scintilla. Not one scintilla.
Good word.
Of good news. Of good news expressed here.
Good word.
That gives me any comfort.
Good word.
Gives me any comfort
You was almost on time.
that this trend is going to be reversed. As I said today, we look forward to the mid-year budget report in a few weeks. which is a much better tool by which to judge the actual state of affairs and not just the wishful thinking of the minister and the wishful thinking of this government as presented in this report. Mr. Speaker, I rest. On behalf of the good people of Exumas and Ragged Island, I thank you, and the people of Exumas and Ragged Island sincerely wish that my projections are wrong. And may God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for East Grand Bahama. Are you on a point of order?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. That's probably a point of clarification. The member referenced the GDP projections for the next 5 years. And he mentioned that it's going down. And I wanted to bring clarity to that because it's important for the public to understand. You're on page 14. So if you look at GDP in constant prices, Mr. Speaker, as a percentage, you'll notice starting in 2016, GDP was actual GDP loss. There was no GDP growth. It was negative 0.17% of GDP loss. In 2017, under the F&M, when we first came in, GDP growth grew by 1.4%. In the year after that, in 2018, this year, I come into it. We project that GDP is going to grow from the 1.4% GDP level to 2.3%. That means additional growth. There's a cumulative thing, Mr. Speaker. When you get to 2019, you'll see the GDP growth, the actual growth from that cumulative 3.7% since we've been to office, you'll see it start to level at 2.1%. So meaning it's coming down a little bit, the growth. Mr. Speaker, this is not to be confused that the economy is going in reverse. What it says is that the growth of the economy, because the projects that we would have had in line, the level of growth, the projects that we had in mind in projecting the 2.3 are being realized. Some of the projects will start to peter off. And so the growth rate will be slower. And as you go into the next year, you see as projects start to complete and they start to level off, the construction phase is complete and they go into full operation, you'll see the level of growth start to come down a little bit. But Mr. Speaker, again, listen, I know you don't understand this. As you said earlier, stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we are still showing positive growth in the economy, year on year. Mr. Speaker, year on year. And so this is a conservative view because we don't know yet what's going to happen in terms of new projects in 2020. So we put a conservative view in to ensure that we don't overestimate, as they are wont to do, that they have done. We don't want to overestimate. And so we project our rate of growth year on year. So Mr. Speaker, this should be taken into context. This is not a continuum. This is not a continuum. It's year on year. And it will go like that, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many? Oh, correct. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted that the minister has now familiarized himself with page 14 of his fiscal strategy report. Yeah. And I reflect on what I said, and I say it with great clarity, Mr. Speaker. The rate of growth has slowed from 2.3 to 2.1 to 1.6 to 1.5 based on the minister's numbers here on page 14. I was very clear that I was talking about the rate of growth. So no amount of additional time speaking on this subject
Honorable Member.
is going
Honorable
to
Member.
clarify.
Honorable Member.
I'm speaking.
Honorable Member.
Yes, Mr.
The Speaker permits members to speak. It is not for you to determine if the member is increasing, because I'm giving you opportunity right now.
I rephrase it. I'm suggesting, Mr. Speaker, that the member from East Grand Bahama continue to explain something that is very clearly outlined on page 14 of the fiscal strategy report. And we, the Bahamian people, can read very well. Members here, honorable members here, can read very well. So if the minister says that I misquoted page 14, I invite him to show me how. But if we look at the bottom of page 14, and we look at the line that says GDP at constant prices, the GDP growth, 2018, 2.3, 2019, 2.1, 2020, 1.6, 2021, 1.5, 2022, 1.5.
Downward.
I rest, Mr. Speaker.
Growth, right?
It seems pretty clear to me.
Honorable members,
Very clear to me, Mr. Speaker.
so as to not go
Is there any growth?
back and forth on this issue. Let me see if I understand what's going on. I'll put it in the form of science and acceleration. In other words, what I understand from what is being presented by both sides is that there was a rate of acceleration. The rate of acceleration has decreased, but that does not mean that we're going in reverse. We're still going forward, but at a slower rate.
Thank you. May I, Mr. Speaker? May I, Mr. Speaker?
What do you want to do? Clarify what I just said?
No, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker. I just want to emphasize something that I said. Something I said, Mr. Speaker. I want to bring clarity to something I said. I never said, Mr. Speaker, that there was negative growth. I said very clearly from page 14 that the rate of growth slowed based on the projections of the fiscal strategy report as presented by the minister.
So what are you trying to
That was very clear.
What are you suggesting, though?
The chair recognizes the honorable member.
Hopefully
Please
this will
stand
be
by.
the end of this, Mr. Speaker. But I think the member, I couldn't have put it better than you put it, Mr. Speaker. You really put it very, very clearly, I think, for the average Bahamian. This is not, these projections are not projecting any loss in GDP. I know. So let's make sure you know what you're saying, because I give you a lot more credit than what you just said. The perception you want to give the Bahamian people, I give you much more credit for that than that. Mr. Speaker, again, as you said, it's the acceleration of growth in any 1 year that we're looking at. So based upon what we know, and we've approved $3.7 billion in investment over the last year. $3.7 billion. That gives us the basis upon which we project the growth for this year and for next year of 2.3 and 2.1. Now, we don't know yet, Mr. Speaker, what projects are going to be approved for the next year, and Oban may be one of them, since you want to talk about that. But Mr. Speaker, we don't know what we're going to approve next year or the year after. And so we take a conservative approach to the growth of the economy in the out years. Those numbers will be revised as we get closer to them. That's the nature of forecast. As you get closer, it becomes clearer. So let's not be disingenuous to the people. No, Exuma, you know better. Please, you know better. Don't do that to the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, as I said, this report is intended to enlighten the Bahamian people. I urge them not to be distracted and not to be fooled by noise. We want to be transparent, accountable, and to educate them so that they can make decisions with all facts before them, Mr. Speaker. And I do regret the members' decision to try and confuse the Bahamian people. This is very simple, and we should not try to do that, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Honorable members.
The member accused me. Please, Mr. Speaker. The member accused me.
You want a point of privilege then?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I've been accused of any number of things. Misleading the Bahamian people, being disingenuous, attempting to confuse the issue. The minister himself was not familiar with the fiscal strategy report and the details on page 14. So if there's anyone being confused, anyone being disingenuous, it's the member for East Grand Bahama.
Honorable
If
member.
there's anyone attempting to
Honourable
confuse the Bahamian people,
Honorable member for Exuma. Thank you. Thank you very much, honourable members. As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Marco City.
Mr. Speaker, with just a point of clarification, and thank you very much, member from Exuma and Ragged Island. With respect to the reference for WTO, again, I thought it's an important admonition that there be additional consultations, but just for those members of the public who may have missed it, we have in fact been doing a number of consultations as it relates to the agriculture and marine resources sector. And in fact, the offer that is being presented is the offer that the WTO is now evaluating from the Bahamas. That offer came from the sector itself. So none of the offers that we are making, the government is constructing it in a vacuum. It is consultation with the sector. The sector then comments on what it believes is necessary for its growth and development. We take that particular offer, and that is what persons, when they travel or when there are consultations in the Bahamas, that's the offer that other countries get to see. So I just wanted members of the public to know, certainly members of the agriculture and marine resources community would know, that the only offer we have put forward is what came from them. As it relates to the fisheries sector, it's not even on the table. So I just wanted that particular clarification.
Thank you, honourable member. As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for Tall Pines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to start by reiterating the words of Reverend Wells, who said this morning when he prayed for us and he gave his charge that everyone in the sound of my voice wants prosperity. I think, Mr. Speaker, that's a good note to start on, especially having heard these two financial juggernauts go at it. But I'm gonna just rephrase the words of the member for Freetown that this fiscal strategy report is truly a historical report. And the report, Mr. Speaker, is done in a way that even me, Mr. Speaker, even me, a lawyer, could understand and digest. Mr. Speaker, I would encourage every Bahamian from Tall Pines to Anagua, Grand Bahama, to do it for yourself. After hearing all of the debate this morning, take a read of this fiscal strategy report for yourself, and you will see for yourself that this F&M government is moving in the right direction as it relates to fiscal and financial responsibility in this great Commonwealth. I'm proud of the work of this good member for East Grand Bahama and his team in the Ministry of Finance for what they've been able to do thus far. I'm proud for the projections that they have put before us. And I could say on behalf of the people of Tall Pines that I rise this morning to support this resolution as it relates to this financial strategy report of 2018. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the good member for Exuma and his colleagues and the rest of the Bahamas really digest the speech of the Prime Minister a few days ago. The Prime Minister made it clear to us that the first time in 12 years, first time since the Great Depression of 2008, that the Bahamas enjoyed a projection growth of more than 2% in 2 consecutive years. Mr. Speaker, if that does not speak to the projection in which this country is going in terms of its financial responsibility, as it relates to how we're going to move this economy, as it relates to putting the Bahamas in the position that it needs to be in, then I don't know what anyone else could expect. I'm proud of this government, Mr. Speaker. And I'm proud to be a part of this team that's able to report to the Bahamian people, for the first time, a report that shows them that we're staying the course. Mr. Speaker, you know, the work that we do in our constituencies is very important. And I just, before going into the report, want to congratulate you because I saw on the internet your No Fruit project in your constituency, where you're having weekends or weekdays of the Ministry of Agriculture or BIAC coming in and teaching, and Bamsey talking about growth, growing your own food, Mr. Speaker. And we intend to do a similar project in Tall Pines. We've already cleared down an area. But I want to invite all Bahamians to get involved in their constituencies. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say to the people of Tall Pines that we're moving on our projects. Our parks project is on the way. We've already, as I said earlier, completed 4 parks, new parks. We're looking at the Jubilee Gardens Park. I just met day before yesterday with the new Jubilee Gardens Crime Watch community group that we're planning various projects to deal with the pool and the other areas of development in the Jubilee Gardens area. Speaker, our constituency office is still operational, and I invite our members to come and speak with me about their concerns. We talked about the WTO, Mr. Speaker. On the 11th of February, we're going to have our town hall meeting addressing the WTO. So I invite all members of Tall Pines to come to Garvin Towns Primary School at 7 o'clock on the 11th of February to learn about what the WTO is all about. Don't just take it from us in Parliament as we throw words against each other back and forth. Come and hear from the experts and express your concerns and your views as it relates to the WTO. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to be here to speak on behalf of the people of Tall Pines on this very historic this very historic resolution. Mr. Speaker, the proposers of this resolution has done a very good job, I would say, with regards to the ironing out and fleshing out what this speaks to. But I just want to remind those who don't really understand the challenges of the government that if you really review this report, and if you look at what we discussed several months ago with regards to the Fiscal Responsibility Act, you cannot come to no other conclusion that we are delivering on our promises. And Mr. Speaker, on many occasions in this House, we've had organizations such as the Organization for Responsible Governance visiting us. And this organization, Mr. Speaker, is one of those organizations that analyze government bills and policies and give their suggestions. And I was happy to hear the minister in his address speak to the fact that the government has been very consultative with respect to this particular act and with respect to this report. And I see that as encouraging for Bahamians to know that they could be a part of the process and their views and ideas are respected. Mr. Speaker, last year, this F&M government presented the 2018 Fiscal Responsibility Bill to this Parliament. That became legislation shortly thereafter. That was done very quickly in this administration. And it was seen, Mr. Speaker, as one of the signature legislations for this administration. And upon passing that bill in Parliament, Mr. Speaker, that legislation set out guiding principles and rules for the way this F&M government, and hopefully governments of the future, will budget, spend, and account for the monies they have been entrusted with. What this piece of legislation does, Mr. Speaker, is restrains the government spending by the force of law, instead of simply relying on the government to do what it chooses. And moving forward, Mr. Speaker, as this report evidence, moving forward, we will have governments that are more fiscally responsible and disciplined when dealing with the government, with the people's money. Again, I wish to use the words of the Minister of Finance in an interview last year when he said that it is a forward-looking bill, and now act, intended to reshape the culture of public accountability. This is building in safeguards to ensure continuity, sustainability, and commitment to fiscal discipline. Mr. Speaker, this report speaks to that. This report is evidence of that. Mr. Speaker, the proposers of this bill and its seconder, Mr. Speaker, as I said, take us through the bill, but I just wish, sure, through the resolution and this report, but I wish to just reiterate for the Bahamian people some important sections of this report. Section 1 of the report, Mr. Speaker, gives our fellow citizens a general introduction of the report and the accounting principles and methods used. Mr. Speaker, Section 2 provides an overview of economic and fiscal performance by our administration for the year 2017-2018. And so it looks at the economic performance, budget, and fiscal performance, and then gives a basic summary, Mr. Speaker, of what is to be expected of the said performance, given that this is the very first report. Speaker, well, the next report of November 2019 will be the true report that really judges the fiscal performance of the government's fiscal performance for the year 2018-2019 period. Section 3, Mr. Speaker, addresses economic and fiscal outlook. Here, there's firstly a discussion on the microeconomic outlook over the medium term. Secondly, the medium-term fiscal outlook. Thirdly, a discussion on debt financing. And fourthly, a look at the government's payment of arrears. Finally, looks at the fiscal responsibility. Section 4, Mr. Speaker, speaks to the government's fiscal strategy as it relates to key budget priorities and considerations. Section 5 presents risk and sensitivity analysis as it relates to contingent liabilities and risk and mitigation strategies. Speaker, as I said, this report is very clear, and the member for Freetown, you know, he may sound like he was joking, but it has a lot of diagrams and easy to read charts. And so the report presents clearly at Annex A, a debt management strategy, looking at current strategy, domestic debts and foreign currency debt, and new initiatives. And also at Annex B, Mr. Speaker, at a second schedule, at Section 10 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, it schedules that deals with the contents of fiscal strategy reports. Now, Mr. Speaker, I went to the length of spelling out those sections because I want the Bahamian people to know the importance of some of the information that's in this report. Mr. Speaker, we know that this 2018 Act that we speak of restrains the government spending. But then an important aspect of that Act, Mr. Speaker, which the minister addressed, is what's called the Fiscal Responsibility Council. Mr. Speaker, in that Fiscal Responsibility Act at Section 16, it calls for the establishment of the Fiscal Responsibility Council. And when we debated that, we talked about the importance of that council and the fact that it was made up of expertise or persons with expertise in law and business and economics and accounts and finance. And Mr. Speaker, that is a very important aspect of that act, and therefore a very important aspect as we move forward when that council is established of how we address these reports. Mr. Speaker, while the council is not established, and we're not yet there because it would really take effect on the 1st of July 2019, that council, Mr. Speaker, will be involved in the report and how we review and assess 2019-2020 report and budget. Mr. Speaker, I don't wish to go into the great details of that council, but I would wish to say that I reiterate what I said when we debated that bill, now the Act, that council, along with this Parliament, will be the teeth of this Act and the strategy, this new fiscal strategy. And here we are today, Mr. Speaker. As was projected, as was called upon by us by that Act, this Fiscal Responsibility Act, we're here now doing what we should do, presenting this report. We're following the Act, Mr. Speaker, and we're doing the responsible thing. We're being accountable to the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, as was anticipated, and as the minister mentioned, the implementation of this revolutionary fiscal policy within the system of our current Bahamian system was not going to be very easy, especially given the government's new fiscal and budget targets. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, the act contemplated a 3-year transition period to allow the Ministry of Finance to align its internal resources to develop or deliver a more rigorous reporting requirements necessary for the Council and for public access to government fiscal strategy performance. Mr. Speaker, the member for East Grand Bahama spoke to the work that his ministry is doing. It spoke to their commitment to what the act really called for them to do. And I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, to support this government resolution and to report to the Bahamian people that just as we said we would do in that act, this is the first government, the first Ministry of Finance government that has been challenged and has lived up to the responsibility, Mr. Speaker, of delivering on the charge of being fiscally responsible to the Bahamian people. And I'm proud to be a part of this F&M government that have lived up to that responsibility, that lived up to that commitment, Speaker. And so I challenge them to look at Table 14 at Section 3.5 of page 24 of this report that sets out in a very easy to read way the government action on fiscal responsibility general principles. So, Mr. Speaker, this report truly moves us in the right direction. This report truly shows our commitment to strengthening the fiber of our economy. This report, Mr. Speaker, truly speaks to what we have been preaching from day one, that we will be a different type of government. We will be a more responsible type of government. We will report to the Bahamian people on when and how and in what regard we take their funds and where we will take them from an economic perspective, Mr. Speaker. And so, we are proud of what we present here in this report. And Mr. Speaker, I know there was great discussions about the projection by the member for East Grand Bahama and the member for Exuma. But I'm convinced, Mr. Speaker, I'm convinced when I hear that we have record growth. I'm convinced, Mr. Speaker, that when we hear that the Ministry of Finance is now being operated in a different way. I'm convinced, Mr. Speaker, when we can hear our Minister of Finance say that we have set a plan in place and that we are truly sticking to that plan. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, we are seeing financial growth. We're seeing projections that will keep the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, from the disaster of continuous downgrades. We will, Mr. Speaker, be steering our Bahamas away from what the member for Exuma spoke about, the IMF. Well, by doing what we're doing now, Mr. Speaker, we'll be moving away from being considered or being scared by the IMF. Speaker, this keeps us in line. This keeps us in line fiscally, Mr. Speaker. And so as we move forward, Mr. Speaker, I encourage Bahamians to digest this report. I encourage Bahamians to be reminded of what we said in our 2018, 2019 budget debate, when we said that this F&M government will lower the deficit and maintain a sustainable fiscal balance, that this F&M government will act to lower the debts of this country, that we will maintain and work to maintaining current expenditure growth in line with growth in normal GDP. Mr. Speaker, we are a people who wants prosperity. We are a people who long for prosperity and fiscal responsibility. Mr. Speaker, this report is evidence of our commitment to that. Mr. Speaker, during the election, we talked about how our government was then, the Christie-Davis administration, was steering us in the wrong direction. Steering us in the wrong direction. And there was a talk, Mr. Speaker, that things will be sweeter with Peter. The finances in the Bahamas will be sweeter with Peter. And I think, Mr. Speaker, if we look at where the Bahamas is going, I'm happy to say, Mr. Speaker, that things in the Bahamas economically is surely sweeter with Peter.
A 1.7% growth is growthing.
Growth, Mr. Speaker, is growth.
better than
From a negative 1.7, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say that the Bahamas could truly say, and I repeat it, it's sweeter with Peter. And so I encourage the sweet Mr. Peter, the member for East Grand Bahama, to continue to do the great job. I encourage the members and the workers of the Ministry of Finance to continue to do the great job. Continue to make it sweeter for the Bahamas fiscally. Continue to make it sweeter for the people of Tall Pines. Continue to make it sweeter fiscally. To make it sweeter for the people of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Tall Pines, support this resolution. Mr. Speaker, it is definitely, Mr. Speaker, as we enjoy, Mr. Speaker, as we enjoy prosperity in the Bahamas. Speaker, as we enjoy prosperity in the Bahamas because the member for East Grand Bahama has made it sweeter, I say, on behalf of the people of Tall Pines, on behalf of the people of Tall Pines, and I say East Grand Bahama, on behalf of the people of the Bahamas, that this fiscal strategy report is the move in the right direction. The people of Tall Pines support this resolution, Mr. Speaker, and let it continue to be sweeter in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Central and South Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today, as I always do, of course, on behalf of the good and industrious people of Central and South Abaco. I would be remiss in my duties, Mr. Speaker, if I did not briefly mention, before addressing the resolution before us, the tragic events in Abaco over the weekend, in which a vessel carrying what, by all intentions, we believe to be mostly Haitian nationals, sank not too far off Foul Key, off of the mainland of Abaco. A number of persons, both private citizens, government agencies, and rescue organizations, assisted with the rescue, the recovery, and of course, all of the very important work that had to happen following, and actually has to continue following, Mr. Speaker. So I wanted to say, on behalf of all of my constituents and all Abaconians, to extend a very sincere and heartfelt thank you to all those who assisted and all those who participate and even in some cases put their own lives in danger, Mr. Speaker, to lend assistance to those in need, no matter where they come from or what nationality, and that when persons are in need of assistance, emergency assistance, Bahamians stand ready to assist. So I wanted to say a big thank you to all of those persons, whether they be private citizens who may have helped, first responders, police, defense force, other government administrative personnel. Thank you very much for your ongoing works. It is very much appreciated. So moving on from that, Mr. Speaker, to the matter before us today, I think a number of other members of this House, most importantly, member for East Grand Bahama and the member for Freetown, I think spoke quite eloquently and passionately about what we are doing here today. And Mr. Speaker, last year when we presented the 2018-2019 budget, we came forward with a plan to rectify Bahamas' economic trend, which we viewed as, which the government viewed as in desperate need of intervention and in desperate need of some strong injection of a transparency and accountability. But we did that, and we also asked the Bahamian people to support us, and we asked them to bear a burden of an increase in their taxes. And in exchange for that, Mr. Speaker, we promised that we would put all of our efforts into being transparent, showing all the Bahamian citizens where their tax dollars were going, how we were spending it, how we were working to improve, how the economy was doing, Mr. Speaker. The Free National Movement is an organization which has always prided itself both in its ideals as well as its actions as being transparent and accountable to its citizens. And Mr. Speaker, this fiscal strategy report is a clear, demonstrable, physical, tangible way of proving that. This is not lip service, Mr. Speaker. These are real, tangible mechanisms we have put in place to ensure accountability amongst the government and our citizenry. Mr. Speaker, I, very much like the member for Tall Pines, am very proud to be a part of that. And I think I speak for not only Abaconians, but Bahamians to say I think we can all be happy when we hear good news about the state of our economy. Politics aside, Mr. Speaker, we can all revel in that. We should all enjoy that. So, Mr. Speaker, we have kept our end of our promise. It was incumbent upon us to come to this place and share this information with the public, make it table it, make it available, make it accessible. And we have done that, Mr. Speaker. And now, through you, Mr. Speaker, I would say, not only to my constituents, but indeed to any Bahamians listening, we have done the utmost of our abilities to live up to our end. And I must please ask and even insist, Bahamians, please get your hands on copies of the fiscal strategy report, the 6-month snapshot, and all of the documents that I'm sure to come, especially leading up to the mid-year budget debate. We have done our utmost to be clear and direct with the Bahamian citizens. Please involve yourselves. Please become part of the process. Use the materials and the resources that the Ministry of Finance has put out. Yep. We want you to be a part of the solution with the government, and keeping all of us educated and all of us up to date with all the ongoings of the government and the strategies moving forward is absolutely key to that. So with those very few short words, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to say very proud to support this resolution. I think it's a great measure for democracy and transparency in our government and the way we handle our taxpayer dollars. May God continue to bless this House and the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Angleston.
Thank you, Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we had spoken...
the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Bamboo Town.
Well, we had spoken with the side opposite and made an understanding that after the member for South and Central Abaco spoke, that the member for Angleston would speak. But we decided that we would do the luncheon break and come back at 3, give her an opportunity, seeing that he was able to move into her slot. And so, Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House suspends until 3 p.m.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose would stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.